Alright, welcome to my Panther tank breakdown video. I'm going to start by explaining the ins and outs of the vehicle and essentially how it operates, as it might be a little confusing. However, you might be surprised to find that the logic behind most of it is pretty self-explanatory and uses real-life technology that was used at the time. So, very quickly, I'll explain exactly how the track even stays on in the first place, as I've noticed a lot of people have said or have asked me how I keep the track on without it coming off. Well, very simply, the Germans were not stupid when they designed tanks, and they knew how things work, and so it's shaped in such a way so that when the wheels come together, which, by the way, they had overlapping road wheels on the Panther, meaning there is an inside wheel and an outside wheel, or two outside wheels. The inside wheel is just two outside wheels but closer together. And essentially, they ride a little bit inside of each other. This allows for a smoother ride for the most part, but that's not necessarily the entire reason. It also spreads the load of the tank more evenly across the track, which leads to less stress overall. But for the most part, the way they work is they come down and they mesh with the interior of these two guide teeth. There's a guide tooth on, or two guide teeth on this particular one. It has two, and they just stick up, and when the track goes over, it will pass on the outside, and as it gets closer to the next wheel, you'll notice that it passes inside the two road wheels here. This allows the track to fit into a very narrow gap between the two wheels, and it it forces them to stay together, because with it like this, the track cannot move left and right as it is obscured by the wheel. And then when it gets to this particular wheel, now it can't move left and right because the wheel is in the way again. So this very simple design keeps the track on the wheel and prevents it from coming off, and it keeps the wheels in line with the track at all time. Very basically. I guess moving on to a little bit more about the actual track tensioning method. You might have noticed there is a slight gap in the tread, and when I press play, they jump together. Yeah, you could ignore that in the background. I don't know what that's about. And on this side, same thing. They jump together. Now, if I was to have a tread connecting from here to here in pause mode, when I push play, they would still be connected. However, there would be a bit of slack here. So what would end up happening is, how do I explain this? What would end up happening is there would be a bit of a bulge here. Oh, yeah, that's not what I meant to do. No, it's gonna do that. Okay, yeah, another one of these glitches. So, when this happens, you just have to quit. Hold on. Yeah, there's many potential issues you face when messing with these. So, you have to do it the first time right, so ignore most of this. Everything got reset. But basically, you have to line it. Basically, there will be a slack in the track, and it will hang down in front because each track in play mode stretches a little bit. They're not perfectly connected. There might be maybe a millimeter of stretch between the bolts. But over the course of 144 track links, that one little tiny little bit of stretch will multiply out, and there will be multiple um, inches worth of extra slack, which will cause the tracks to slack. So in what you do with that is you make each piece non-collidable, or non-movable, my bad. And then when it's in play mode, you then have to drag the other track over to the first one, and then push pause, and then connect them via a bolt. And then, when they're connected via a bolt, when you press play, the game will force them together. And you'll see here, there's a red line indicating that it is being pulled, meaning that they belong together. So in play mode, they will then be forced to join, which tensions the track automatically and removes any such slack in the track, which helps keep a very clean look. And yeah, just another hurdle that I had to go through in order to get this thing to work, which applies to almost every tank that I've built. Okay, from here I'd like to talk a little bit about how everything works under the scenes, or behind the scenes, sorry. So from here, you may have noticed there's a couple of things that pop into view when I turn on, when I show the invisibility. For one, a lot of these pieces here have extra cubes or cubes on them, and these cubes serve no purpose other than to add extra weight to each piece, because, for example, each link weighs 71 kilograms, but if you delete the cube, now each link only weighs 29 kilograms, and in Dreams, weight is king. Weight factors into a lot of things, but most importantly, weight determines how strongly the bond between the two objects connected via a bolt. Because, for example, I'll put that cube back. Okay, so you'll notice that they normally stay pretty close connected. However, if I remove the weight, sorry, scatterbrain here. If I remove the weight of this, it will still be connected, but it's hard to see on just a couple links because, you know, it's only a few and it can still hold the weight. But when you add, say, here, I'll try it on a much larger scale just so you get a better idea. You can see the stretch happen more closely. You'll notice it starts to fall and get stretched quite a bit. Now again, even this isn't that much weight. That's only maybe a third to a half the amount of track links. So when there is a full track below, in order to keep a strong bond, it still gets stretched a bit, but again, it keeps it much more tightly controlled, and it essentially allows each link to be very strong to one another. And it just helps everything. Oh, of course, though, that means that the track itself is quite heavy overall. So, what also means that in order to move the vehicle, in order to go anywhere, the wheels have to spin, and there's nothing pulling on the track. The wheels are just spinning, which is unrealistic, as in real life. These wheels would not be turning, they would be static. And the front road wheel, which is the drive sprocket here, the drive sprocket in real life has these teeth, as you can see, all around the edge, and these teeth mesh in real life into the recesses, these little holes here in the track, which actually mechanically forces them to turn. However, in Dreams, things are a bit more complicated than that, and they just don't work very well. The real life physics do not work the same. So what ends up happening is, I'll very quickly explain. This piece here is non-collidable, so the track can go through it. But when you turn on invisibility, you'll notice there's a secondary piece. And this piece right here is actually part of the group, and the track rests on top of it. These angled pieces here prevent the track from, you say the track is off, those little guide teeth are off to the side. When a guide tooth hits this, the angled surface forces it back into the center, meaning it will always stay in the middle area. Without this angled piece here, and it was just flat, the teeth will hit this at an obscure angle, causing the road wheel to jiggle and causing the track to jiggle uncontrollably, which causes the vehicle to look unrealistic, which is not what you want, obviously. So that's just there to hold the track up. These other ones are just there to add weight. The suspension is very simple. It's each pair of road wheels is a pair, like I said, inner and outer. They're connected to a block, which just adds weight to keep it strong. And then the two are connected on each side, and then in the middle there is a pivot allowing them to move up and down to imitate suspension, not actually provide suspension, as the center bolt does not move up and down. In real life, the individual wheels would have individual torsion, which these do not. These just go up and down. So it can imitate suspension, but not actually be suspension. If you were to ride inside of this, it would be very uncomfortable. And so it just goes all the way across. This is a very cheap and inexpensive way of making realistic looking suspension without actually going through the trouble of actually making real suspension. However, I have made real suspension, and at the end of this video I'll probably go over what actual suspension looks like. It's very complicated, and I didn't want to go through that with this vehicle, as there's already a lot of things I had to cross in order to get this far. As far as how the tracks are made, I can explain very simply that when I make these, all I have to do is take a Google search and simply type in whatever the tank's actual name is, which in this case it was Panzerkampfwagen 5 Panther, and then you type tread or track link, and a lot of model kits or model companies sell metal tracks for plastic models, and or sometimes you will find an actual image of the original track somewhere online, usually in a museum or something. And so you can get a lot of good angles of a real track. Of course, this is not a perfect representation. It's just a close mock-up, and it's very, very close to the original one. And the trick is just making it look as nice as possible, because once you have cloned this, there's no going back, and you won't be able to edit any of it, because you'd have to edit every single one, and that'd probably be a pain in the ass. Excuse my language. And so, once you've created your track link, you then shift it forward, and then you pin it in place using a bolt. And once you've done this, you copy both, move it forward. This is the arduous task, but once you get the first couple going, it becomes easier, as it becomes a roller coaster or a landslide. So you do the next one, then you copy all of them, move them across, and now at this point, you just add one more pen, and then you copy them again, move over, add another pen here, copy all of them, move them over, and every time you copy them, they carry the previous bolts with them. And so once you've bolted about 5 of them, you've reached the typical length of a normal track set. I usually go, I believe, 6 or 7, just so I have more than enough, and I can always delete them later. And then from here, you just keep going until you add is... See, this is only 63, which means I'm only about halfway the normal length. You just keep going. When I placed this down, I was a bit off, so these aren't going to be perfectly lined up. And then, once you've got them all in place, you would then line it up on the wheel. And you would go through the arduous task of placing each individual... You'd have to angle this and just go all the way around, angling each piece as you go, and then go all the way around, and then get to the center part, where you would then connect them together. As far as the external assets of the vehicle and just the general appearance, most of that is just experience with modeling, and most of it is not very difficult. Again, the start of this vehicle was very simple. I mean, the hull is extremely simple. It looks complicated because of all the extra lines I've added to it, but for the most part, it is as simple as it gets. The hull originally started as a giant rectangle, and then all I did was I took pieces and I just added the actual artificial angles to them. And there's some here, you know, you pull it out, you can see where I put it in. And it's just a matter of, you know, setting the right pieces in the right way. You can see here I curved this piece. And for the most part, shaping is the easy part. Most of it is basic geometric shapes. So for the most part, it's all very simple to put together. A lot of these pieces are... I tried to keep as many pieces as one, so that way I don't use too many moving parts. So, for example, this door hatch is all part of the same hull. Even though it would look as if this hatch could open, it actually will never open, just because of it being in the same sculpt as the hull is. And basically the same thing for the turret. The only 3 pieces here are the hull, the turret, and the gun. And as well the tracks and the wheels. But as far as that's concerned, most of it is all one sculpt for each one. The gun itself, that is really laggy. The gun itself was pulled off of another model that I did before. It was off of my Pack 40 model. I just simply copied and pasted it simply because it's the same gun, from if I do recall correctly. And then I added a gun mantlet over the vehicle, as it should have. And just like in real life, I cut out the cuts as they should be, and everything just kind of falls in place. So, yeah, that pretty much covers most, if not all, of everything. A lot of the animations for the door hatch are just all animated, so if you understand keyframes, then you'll understand how that works. The hull is pretty barren, with not much on the interior, as I needed to save weight, so I actually went through the process of carving out the inside. Not necessarily for the realistic purposes. The only intention I had was carving out the turret so you could see inside. The hull was mainly for weight distribution, to keep the weight down, so that the tracks, because you really want the tracks to be the main weight factor of the vehicle, because everything rides on the tracks. And in terms of a game, in terms of the game's game engine, it works best when the tracks are the heaviest part of the vehicle. That way everything is located around the tracks and everything just is very balanced in that respect. Okay, so I promised I would explain at the end of this video how actual suspension works in this game. So very briefly, I'll try and explain it. This is built almost entirely the same way as the other vehicle. I created this vehicle before my Panther. So a lot of the stuff I learned from this I applied to Panther. However, just be aware that this was an earlier model and I was less experienced as I built this maybe 5 months prior. So there's a couple things that are a little odd about it, but yeah. So going forward with the suspension, the Type 95 Hago light tank, which is what this vehicle is, uses a system known as bell crank, which is a early suspension system, and this is based entirely off of the bell crank suspension. So the way bell crank works is in the middle of this pipe there is a steel plate somewhere around here, and there are 2 springs on each side of that plate. So there's a spring inside here and a spring inside here, and you can see that there's a spring modeled here. However, these are just visual and don't actually do anything, as it's just a spring for the visual aspect of it. But anyways, you'll see here that there is an arm here, and this bolt here is the pivot arm. It's a fulcrum, basically. You've got the bar running to the center of these 2 bogies, and you'll see these pivot just like on Panther. However, the difference being is that while these 2 pivot here like in real life as they would have, the actual vehicle has real suspension in the arm behind it, as this piece can go up and down. Let me get back so you can actually see that. This can actually go up and down, offering actual dampening to what it's going over. And the way that works is when this goes back in play mode, this, for visual sake at least, this piece comes out and follows it because it's connected. And there is a, it's difficult to see, but there is a connector. It is a, oh wait, that's the slider. Oh, sorry, I got this confused with my Type 97. The connectors are actually inside, my bad. So this is all visual stuff, but the bolt center line here goes through the inside of the tank all the way across, mainly for weight distribution. So these bars go all the way the length across inside of each other, just purely for the sake of adding weight in order to keep the arm as tight as possible. And then here I'm using a bit of real life logic. The bar here adds leverage. So if I was to just put the connectors, and this is something else I did not notice at the time, I put as many connectors as I could here. I did not know this at the time, but 1 connector is the same strength as, 10 connectors. They don't add additional pulling power, so to speak. So this was an example of me not knowing what I was doing until I learned later. A single string or elastic band would have done the same as all of the ones that I added to it. But in the end, the leverage arm actually will increase its ability to pull on to keep the vehicle suspended. Because when you press play, you'll notice that it actually does what it's supposed to. I'll play it again for you. It's a little difficult to see due to the bolts being in the way. And you can see up inside, the actual bar follows the fulcrum arm. And this allows the vehicle to go up and down, allowing it to actually dampen the blow of bumps that it goes over, just like in real life. However, this method of suspension is very glitchy, and half the time it doesn't work. Some tanks it works really well in, sometimes it just doesn't work at all. I can show you very quickly what that looks like. So that very much explains how that particular suspension works. I've got another vehicle here that I could quickly show. That is just an example. So this is my BMP2 that I'm working on. It uses a very similar system. These are using torsion bar suspension, which is what the vehicle had. And inside, the bars run across. Instead of it being like a bell crank, they're much simpler. The bar just connects directly to the wheel and then runs the lengthwise of the chassis. On this one, I've got leverage arms that extend out, and on each of the leverage arms, there's going to be a string attached to each one. Strings specifically because they're stronger than elastic bands. Elastic bands are not strong enough to hold the weight of the vehicle. And with a string, a string will still stretch under enough weight, allowing it to act as a very strong elastic band. So when I push play, it will actually hold up the weight of the vehicle using the leverage arm, because if these arms weren't here, and say it was just trying to hold it up by a very short arm, it just wouldn't have enough strength. These bars it increases the strength of the string so that it can actually hold it up. And what that looks like in play mode, I use the same engine sound for all of these, so